Are you guys ready? Okay, you have 15 minutes. Go ahead.
Good afternoon and welcome to Euro Connection. I'm your host, Vera Mueller. In our continuing series on economic issues in the Euro area, today's panel will take a close look at demographics and an aging workforce in Germany. I'm joined today by Michaela Kreifeld, a demographic researcher, Eliza Fischer, a member on the Council of Economic Experts, Adele Ackerman, a labor economist, and Heidi Vogel, Germany's finance minister. But before addressing today's topic, let's take a quick view at the economic situation in the Euro area as a whole. 2016 was the first full year in which the Euro area GDP was above the pre-crisis level. Recovery picked up steam in the fourth quarter, with quarterly growth at 0.4%. For the year, the EA grew at a relatively healthy 1.7%. Leading indicators suggest a faster recovery in 2017. Consumer sentiment and monetary policy provide tailwinds for future economic growth. In March, the harmonized inflation rate was 1.5%, slightly lower than the February rate of 2%. Average inflation rates over the past 3 months have exceeded 1%, easing concerns that the Eurozone would fall into what ECB President Draghi calls the danger zone. However, as you can see, there is a significant variation in the inflation rates across the Euro area, and this has started the debate over the future ECB one-size-fits-all monetary policy, which we all know is just one aspect of belonging to a single monetary union. This graph shows a seasonally adjusted unemployment rate, which is about 9.5 as of February. Still, some countries have debt levels that have unemployment rates that are above the 8% pre-crisis level. Even with this good economic news, some high debt levels in some countries continue to drag on the pace of economic growth. Moving on to the debt to GDP ratio. The average EA debt level is about 90%. However, this does not show the true variations, with Greece at a high of 176 and Estonia slightly under 10. 14 countries have debt levels that exceed the 60% debt limit imposed by the Maastricht Treaty. Eliza, can you please give us an update on Germany's performance?
Of course. Despite a growth rate of a half percentage point below the EA average, Germany ended the year on a positive note, growing by 0.4% in the last quarter of 2016. This was helped by higher state spending on refugees, increased private consumption, and higher investment in housing. Exports continue to play a dominant role in Germany, accounting for about 50% of its GDP. Overall, growth reached 1.9% for 2016, the strongest rate in 5 years. And growth is expected to pick up the pace in the first quarter of 2017.
And what can you tell me about inflation?
The headline inflation rate in March was 1.5%, dropping from a 4-year high of 2.2% in February. The drop was attributed to the easing of increases in food and energy prices. Inflation is predicted to remain moderately stable throughout the remainder of 2017, as this pressure from food and energy prices subsides.
Thank you. Adele, what about unemployment?
The news from the labor market is positive. In February, the unemployment rate was 3.9%. Hiring has been brisk as employers express confidence in the economy. As the market tightens, we'll look for the rate to further decline, and youth unemployment was a healthy 6.5%.
And the debt to GDP ratio?
The government estimates a budget surplus of 25 billion euros for 2016, and a debt to GDP ratio of about 68%. By 2020, debt is expected to fall below the Maastricht Treaty's 60% target. At least for the near term, Germany is in excellent fiscal health.
Thank you all. That brings us to today's topic, demographics and an aging workforce in Germany. Dr. Kreifeld, you're the demographer. Can you please start us off?
A half-century ago, reaching old age was the exception rather than the rule. In 1950, global life expectancy was 47 years. by 2050 is expected to reach 75 years.
I'm sure this is good news for the people of the world.
Demographers do view population aging as a modernization success story.
I guess this growth can be attributed to the medical advances of the last half century.
That's true. As you can see from this chart, in 2010, about 20% of the German population was 65 or older. This number is expected to reach about 34% in 2050. Only Italy's and Japan's percentages will be greater. Demographers refer to this as hyperaging.
So what's the downside?
This wouldn't be a problem if it wasn't for the corresponding decline in fertility rates. This table shows how life expectancy has increased over the past 50 years, while at the same time, fertility rates have declined. In Germany, the fertility rate has gone from 2.5 children per woman to 1.3. Despite a recent uptick in fertility, Germany would still require a birth rate of about 2.5 to 3 in order to ensure a sustainable workforce in the future.
An aging population must pose some real challenges.
I agree. These demographic trends can have profound implications for an economy. Low fertility rates can lead to a shrinking workforce, while increasing life expectancy can depress economic growth and put pressure on government services.
This is a particular problem in Germany. As you can see on this graph, we expect to see a shortage of 8 million workers by 2030. This is 20% of the current workforce. A shrinking labor force also means that fewer goods and services can be produced. In addition to the shortage, we know that as the workforce ages, it's less likely that we will see creativity and innovation.
Research shows that by 2030, the UK, whose population is younger, may outrank Germany as Europe's largest economy. By 2040, Germany's working age population is expected to contract by 0.9%, while the UK's will grow by 0.3%. This is a serious concern for Germany's long-term economic health. Not only does this impact productivity, but it creates some fiscal challenges as well.
I completely agree. Take a look at this graph. Germany's old age dependency ratio is among one of the highest in the world. The OADR represents the number of pensioners as a percentage of the labor force, and Germany's current ratio is at around 32%. But by 2050, it will reach 60%. Another way of looking at this. Right now, it takes about 5 workers to support 1 pensioner. But by 2050, the same 5 workers will be needed to support 3 pensioners. This is a real concern.
How does this affect government spending?
Presently, 1/3 of all government spending goes to the elderly. As the OADR increases, Germany will need to spend even more on healthcare and pensions.
How is the German government planning to address this problem?
So far, we've implemented the RIESTER reforms, which have reduced government contributions to pensions while encouraging the expansion of private pension options. These are significant improvements, but Germany may still have to increase taxes or decrease spending in other areas to support its aging population. If we don't increase the labor force and make reforms to our old age benefit system, Germany will begin losing ground.
Thank you all for your insights into this problem. I think it's time for us to discuss possible solutions to these challenges. What do we need to focus on? Any recommendations?
Our primary challenge is to close that labor shortage gap, and I see 3 solutions. First, implement a phased-in retirement scheme. Second, increase the fertility rate. And finally, fully incorporate immigrants into the labor force.
The first solution is to keep people in the workforce longer, either on a full or a part-time basis. Many Germans take early retirement at 63, which is earlier than the current retirement age of 65. And although the government plans to increase the retirement age to 67 by 2029, the trend in Germany is to retire before this official age. If we could encourage Germans to stay in the workforce longer, either on a full or part-time basis, we can minimize the impact of the labor force. And that would solve some of the labor shortage issue. But in all honesty, Germany's participation rate is pretty decent.
To add to your point, Adele, we need to continue moving toward a larger private pension system. Shifting the burden of pension payments from the government to the private sector will go a long way toward easing this fiscal burden. Tax credits for retirement savings would also be a big help in this area.
Thank you, Heidi. Michaela, do you think you can further elaborate on the fertility problem?
As discussed earlier, Germany has one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, and requires a birth rate of about 2.5 to 3 in order to avoid future demographic imbalance. The German family policy is currently in a state of transition. Despite recent government policies implemented to address these low rates, such as parental leave benefits and guaranteed childcare after the age of 1, Germany still sees a large gap between the demand for childcare and the supply.
What can be done?
Despite the policy guaranteeing access to public daycare, there just aren't enough slots for every child. Germany needs to focus on increasing the number of childcare centers. In addition, childcare workers are often underpaid, which leads to shortages in quality care. During a 2015 strike of childcare workers, the German government realized that it is in need of an additional 120,000 childcare workers to fully staff our childcare centers.
We've been very good at implementing structural reforms, but cultural changes take much longer. Let's not forget Germany's long history of stigmatizing working mothers. We've all heard the term Rabenmutter.
There isn't a working mother in Germany who hasn't heard that expression at some point. But please, let's continue.
Truly, the most obvious way to close this labor shortage gap is to make better use of our immigrant population.
I agree. Last month, a study by the Bundesbank estimated economic growth under 2 different scenarios, with and without full integration of the immigrant population. Without fully integrating the immigrant population, output per capita will decline, as immigrants won't have the necessary skills for future jobs. Fully incorporating the immigrants is estimated to have a positive effect on growth. Our future growth depends on our ability to tap into this valuable human capital.
You're right. Our existing population is not sufficient. We need to supplement our workforce with an additional 500,000 well-trained, educated immigrants each year through 2050. But this is easier said than done.
Why?
Only 8% of university students are from immigrant backgrounds, and there are significant educational deficits on the primary and secondary level as well.
Is it solely the lack of education?
If I may add, while the education deficit impacts the already existing immigrant population, recent arrivals face obstacles entering Germany's job market, as they must apply for a residence card and a work permit. To get those, they must demonstrate basic German language skills, solid work qualifications, and proof that they won't become a burden on the state.
What's the solution?
The way I see it is that we have 2 areas we need to address. One is improving access to higher level education for the immigrant population by reducing the language barrier. And the other is to make the German immigration process for highly skilled workers less complex for both the immigrant and the potential employer.
I think it's important to note that the difference in language proficiency between native-born Germans and foreign language immigrants is 39 points. This language gap creates an overall disadvantage for the children of immigrants when it comes to entering a university-bound track. This often sets them up into lower educational tracks that will make them go into low-skilled jobs, and then that would stifle their ability to contribute to future innovation and growth.
So we need to find a way to overcome the language barrier so the children of immigrants won't automatically be placed into these lower educational tracks.
Exactly. I recommend that an early childhood intensive German language program be implemented so that children can become fluent in German and overcome the language barrier that hinders them from those higher level education tracks.
What about recently arrived immigrants?
Well, we can't continue to rely on immigration solely from the EU. We need to make our immigration process clearly understood so that immigrants from beyond the EU know they're welcome. This requires new immigration law that makes rules transparent, offers immigrants prospects for long-term stay and naturalization. This is the only way that we will reduce the shortage of skilled workers that Germany is in need of in the future.
We've talked about many possibilities today, and we have solid ideas on where to go from here. So, before we adjourn our time today, let's quickly recap what we have discussed. We all agree that Germany needs to focus on its demographic problem. In summary, I believe we have made a few recommendations to reverse the labor shortages. First, implement a phased-in retirement scheme to extend the working life of the labor force. Second, increase the availability and quality of childcare centers for working parents to induce higher fertility rates. And third, improve education and employment opportunities for immigrants to better incorporate them into the workforce. Thank you for joining us today on Euro Connection. Please tune in next week when we'll take a close look at the impact of Brexit on diplomatic relations in the EU.
Thank you very much. Our first two questions are relatively general. One, the outlook for the global economy has turned more positive recently. How and why might this benefit the rate of GDP growth in the euro area?
Trade is a very important aspect of the global economy. So the growth of other economies would therefore help the other economies in the euro area.
And since exports are a dominant role in Germany's GDP and accounts for 50% of it, having better trade would obviously just boost that.
Number two, the inflation rate in the euro area has increased steadily in the past year. How and why has the monetary policy of the European Central Bank influenced the inflation rate?
Well, the ECB has a one-size-fits-all monetary policy, meaning that the monetary policy the ECB determines applies to the 19 EA countries.
In addition, the ECB's policy for inflation is their mandate is to keep it around 2%, slightly below if possible. And as you saw recently last month, there was a spike, but then there was a drop to 1.5 for March. So there is no trend appearing, so there isn't a need to necessarily reduce their expansionary policy, monetary policy, because that would be premature. We should wait to see if a trend develops first.
The expansionary monetary policy that she just mentioned is a combination of negative interest rates and quantitative easing, which is buying longer-term assets.
A couple of times in your presentation, you said that an aging population wouldn't just have an impact on the average age and size of the workforce, but that it would also reduce productivity growth. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that happens?
Well, as younger people do come into the workforce, you have fresh minds that are fresh out of education. So therefore, you get new innovation, new ideas, especially right now in Germany. They're being educated in a lot of technical fields. And so as they move into the workforce, you see how they bring these ideas with them and add new ideas into the workforce.
And especially for the older part of the workforce who are nearing retirement age or perhaps considering taking early retirement, they might have less incentive to put in as much effort for the work, and that could be that could cause slower growth.
But it is crucial that we have a strong labor force that is not decreasing in size, because we want to keep on growing as a nation and keep on developing.
Okay, so your solutions to dealing with the demographic problems are all inward in the sense of having workers work longer, having higher fertility rates, and getting better use out of your immigrant population. But Germany is in an economic union where there's free mobility of labor. The German unemployment rate today is less than 4%. The Spanish unemployment rate is over 15%. The Greece is over 20%. So my question to you is, why shouldn't the solution to the German problem is, if Germany has a strong economy, shouldn't it be attracting workers from the rest of the EU? And why isn't that happening right now? Why are the unemployment rates so divergent across countries?
In Germany, the labor demand right now is greater than the labor supply, so Germany has to look to other countries in the EA or EU for immigrants to come in and hopefully supplement our workforce so that it can be stronger and reduce our natural rate of unemployment.
In addition to her point, the EU is also dependent on immigrants outside of the EU.
And although we do have a lower unemployment rate, we do have job vacancies of 8 million jobs at the moment.
And also, most of our job vacancies are for skilled workers, so we are looking for those educated workers from other countries to come into our country and work for and supply the jobs we need in our country.
Just a follow-up question on monetary policy. Is aging and the trends that you are seeing in Germany a challenge for carrying out a single monetary policy in the Eurozone?
Germany is one of the strongest economies in the euro area. In fact, it is the strongest economy in the euro area. So this one-size-fits-all monetary policy could tend to be more tailored to countries that are really struggling. So with this aging workforce, we need to focus on closing the labor shortage gap. And the ECB's monetary policy right now is working on trying to stimulate the economy, as in a lot of the euro area is in an economic slump.
However, being part of the EI has helped Germany in its export area because as other countries are in economic slack, it pushes down the value of the euro, so it's weaker, so more countries will buy German exports, which does spur our economy greatly. So we have benefited greatly from it.
We have no more questions. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes.
Well, congratulations to all the finalist teams, and congratulations on completing your final round presentations. Just quickly, I wanted to thank our three judges for spending their whole afternoon here. I know you've given them a tough challenge of deciding the ranking of the 5 finalist teams. I'd like to also extend a thank you to the delegation of the European Union to the United States for the program, and a big thank you to Ambassador David O'Sullivan, who joined us this afternoon to watch your presentation. I didn't want to tell the students that you were here. I didn't want to make them even more nervous than they already are. And lastly, a thank you to the Fed for hosting us this afternoon and this morning for the semifinal round. Just a quick note, I'm sure all of you are joining us at the Moody's Foundation for the awards ceremony. When you head out, please stop by registration. You'll have to pick up your cell phones, as well as Moody's dropped off all our name badges for security. So you want to make sure you pick up the green name badges before you leave. That way, when we get to Moody's, we can go straight up to the 20th floor. Okay? All right. Thank you all.